work on the sustainability, innovation, and growth of family businesses in our region. And we've been doing this for 12 years now, and very often during our sessions, a lot of topics come up that we feel could interest more people than just our members. And so connectivity has been a topic that has concerned a lot of people, but not a lot of people know why. So I think that was the initial point of departure of saying, why is this going to change the world that we live in? And really the motivation for this talk today is to initiate this topic. We will have further conversations, of course, around this. But I'm very, very grateful to have Maria Kohn as our moderator tonight. I'm very grateful that she took this task over. It's obviously a topic that needs a little bit of dissection for everybody to understand what we're talking about. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'd like to thank all of you for making your way here and for taking the time to be with us. I think there's still people on the way, but we'll let them come in and be nice to them. So please don't let yourself get disturbed by any latecomers. So without any further ado, Maria, thank you so much for doing this, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Farida. Good evening, everyone. Indeed, when I first heard about the topic, I have to say I was a little bit intimidated. But then obviously I saw the list of speakers that we have for tonight that are, all experts in their field. So I figured they can bring the expertise, and I don't know much, so I'll probably be able to ask the dummy questions so that then, hey, break it down for us and we can all understand a little bit better. The way we will do it, I'll ask the three speakers now to introduce themselves and just set a little bit the scene and the context of their expertise. And then we will dive into some of the topics in some more detail. And then we will open it up to questions from you as well if I haven't covered anything that you're very interested in. So I'll hand it over to Jeroen first. Yeah.
Thank you, Maria. So my name is Jeroen Schlosser. I lead Equinix for the Middle East. Probably that's not a name that you're familiar with, but I'm quite sure that most of you visit Equinix a couple of times a day. We run data centers worldwide, and in those data centers there is a large number of customers, network providers like we have Du and Elassaad here in the UAE, and a whole number of service providers like content providers connecting their networks and systems. And if you browse the internet, then it's very likely that you use one of our data centers worldwide. And let me give you in 2-3 minutes say the history on how we got to this position, to give you the context for some of the things in the conversation today. Equinix is more than 20 years old, and we started perhaps in a period in the US that was similar to what we see here today in the UAE. We see an environment where two carriers that have always been protected need to deal with changes in the market, need to deal with digital transformation, and find, say, new products, new revenue streams to further grow their existence in the market. 25 years ago, America was in a similar position. The carriers in that market, the products were deregulated, and the carriers needed to learn on how do we connect together. Do I bring my network to you, or do you bring your network to me? And then whose liability is this, and who pays for the cost? The founders of Equinix then found the opportunity to say, hey, wait a minute, if we then put a building in the middle, and I give the carrier on the left a bit of space in the building, the carrier on the right a bit of space in the building, and then I have my people as neutral people connect those two networks, then we can create a business model. And that's the way Equinix started. And initially it was just carriers utilizing our building, but soon people from the finance industry started to figure, hey, wait a minute, if I do electronic trading, and I'm in the middle of all the information and have access to the information in the fastest way, I can make more money than somebody that is further away from data or from a transaction. And then we saw a lot of traders, a lot of financial institutes, financial data providers move to our data centers. And that was really the start of our growth worldwide. And if I then fast forward a little bit, today we operate in more than 50 cities, over 200 of those neutral buildings where everybody doing something digital connects and uses us as a platform to, on one side, sell their services, and on the other side, the enterprises consume their services, and they do all that selling and consuming of services by utilizing connectivity or interconnection, as we call that.
Thanks, Jeroen. And we'll come back to some of those points in a bit. Wissam?
Hello. Hello. Thank you for hosting. My name is Wissam Elassaad. I'm the Regional Director Business Development for Orange, heavily focused on smart cities and IoT and healthcare. Everyone probably knows Orange as a mobile operator. We don't operate here from a mobile regulatory point of view, but Orange here really acts as a master systems integrator, integrating multiple services, smart services, into building smart districts and smart cities around the region. From a connectivity point of view, probably Orange also one of the core in the DNA for Orange is the connectivity, and we have over 450,000 kilometers connected around the globe from underwater cables, because Orange have submarine cables, and Orange also invests in more than 600 million euros every year from backbone infrastructure. So really connectivity is in our DNA, and from smart cities point of view, where we see emerging technologies, whether LoRa technologies or narrowband IoT, 4G, 5G. This is really the technologies that we use to be able to promote smart services in the region. And I will probably go into more detail from a connectivity point of view.
Thank you, Wissam. Let me try to get this in Dutch, proper Dutch accent. Jeroen? No. Oh, sorry. Nizar. So I missed already the proper Dutch accent. Sorry about that. Nizar.
Hello everyone, I am Nizar Jegham, and I am a principal consultant at NXN. NXN is a boutique advisory firm, member of the Zain Telecom Group, which is headquartered in Kuwait and with operation in the GCC, but also in Africa. For NXN, what we do mainly, we do two things. Advisory on the digital transformation of public sector organizations. So we cover the region, the Gulf region and the Middle East, North Africa region. So, and this first part, digital transformation of public sector, means how public sector organization can onboard new technologies in order to improve their business processes and deliver better services. This is one part. The second part of what we do is advise, again, municipality, local governments, regulators, as well, on feasibility of smart cities. So smart city means we help them identify what portfolio of technologies are required to address their mobility problems, security, managing the built environment, how do they need to deploy and operate this, who should they partner with, and eventually how they would finance this, and how they what would be the qualitative and the quantitative return of investment that they might have. So these are mainly the activities we do. We work with obviously the company really started as an advisor to the Smart Dubai office. This is a historic customer, and then we covered the region throughout the year. We work in multiple GCC countries, Saudis, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman.
Thank you, Nizar. Just to now start breaking it all down, let's start with the basics, and given that you seem to kind of like almost physically sit in the middle of it all, what is connectivity? What is interconnection? What is driving it? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think great question. Let me try to explain it as basic as possible. I think the way we see interconnection or connectivity is the private exchange of data in between companies or in between ecosystems where different stakeholders do business or work together. And that's really driven by a couple of things. Initially, by the change of technology. We've seen over the last couple of years cloud compute taking a huge step forward, and cloud compute gives people the opportunity to run their IT systems in a different way. People can run them at different locations, people can run those services and easily switch them on, switch them off. And the second thing that really drives interconnection is, I always like to say, is the mobile. Because all of us have this device in our pocket, we all started to change our behavior. If we want something, we want it immediately. We want to watch at our smartphone, and we want to have a certain piece of information, we want to exchange information, or we want to buy something. And in order to be able to do that, or for companies to sell me something on my phone, they need to be interconnected. Companies need to bring their IT systems to a location where they can easily connect with all the things that live on our smartphones, and in that way have the ability to reach me as a consumer. And then if you look what that does to the way we design IT, if we would go perhaps 20-25 years back, IT systems were predominantly, say, systems of record. We would do a transaction, we would store that transaction data, we would put it in a database, or we would perhaps even store it a long time. And a supply chain was really sequential. So you had a manufacturer, you had some logistics, you had probably a wholesaler or a dealer, and then perhaps retail. And that was the way we done business. Because we want everything real time, and even better, we want it personalized, we now have a total different way on how we look at IT. And we like to call that, we now have a system of engagement. And you mentioned sitting in the middle, and I think that's the way you should look at today's IT. The consumer sits in the middle, and around him sits a circle of providers. It's the whole supply chain, all the stakeholders that are required to deliver a product or a server as specific and as timely possible to that consumer. And if you want to make that possible, then you need to be in a place where you physically can connect to all the different providers. You want to connect to your full supply chain at the same time, and almost in a real-time manner do business with everybody in there. And I think that is the underlying driving force of interconnection. Globally, we have about 10,000 customers in our data centers worldwide. All those customers together have about 300,000 physical connections to each other. So that's all circuits that they use to exchange data. And if I give one last example, if I load a social media page or perhaps a newspaper on my iPhone, what happens in the background is that my app sends a signal probably to a platform that says, hey, there is an expat in the UAE, he's Dutch national, probably this age, I think he has 2 children, who wants to run a specific advertisement for that person. So in the time that my social media page or my newspaper loads the content of that page, in the background my data is shared with an enormous amount of other companies, and people can then almost auction or bid on who wants to reach me. So all those actions all depend on connectivity. Can you reach all the people that are relevant in reaching your end customer? And that's the way we see interconnection. If you look to how that then impacts, let's say, a region as the UAE, we started 7 years ago with our business here in the UAE, and we have 3 data centers today in the UAE, and in those data centers there is 50 different telecom providers, say 35 global telecom providers, the American, European, Asia Pacific providers, and 15 to 20 regional providers. And those people connect their networks, and they connect their networks with the content, the e-commerce platforms, to reach, say, all of us here in the region. And those connections are still most of the time today physically in those data centers. So I hope I gave a bit of a...
You did. You give us a good sense of the magnitude of it all, actually. So I'd like to go to you, Nizar. And I mean, again, like, there's clearly, it's massive. So for someone, individual or company that's not necessarily, at the forefront of technology, can you make this all a little bit more tangible for us? Like, what is the impact on the way we live and do business? And obviously, there's a lot of hype, but what's the reality of this?
Yeah, maybe before that, I'll just to build on what Jeroen was saying. Just summarize a little bit what we mean by, how connectivity is impacting us so far. So, because there is already an impact on the way we do work, on the way we socialize, we build relationships, and even on the way we entertain ourselves. I mean, for work, more and more people just need a laptop and an internet connection, and they can work from everywhere. This is possible because of the connectivities of the wired and wireless network that we don't see. So on the social side, I mean, we see the role of social media in our lives, the way people create relationships with each other, like the likes of Tinder and other application or tools that are available to us. And also the way we consume entertainment. I mean, now Netflix is competing with cinema. I mean, we have thousands of movies available to us. So all of this was not possible maybe 10 or 15 years ago, at least not as easy as it is now. So this is on the connectivity as a whole. Now on IoT, or why we are talking about IoT, the Internet of Things. Why Internet of Things compared to, I mean, by difference or by comparison to what? The reason of the terminology of Internet of Things is that before, networks were mainly composed of PCs or laptops, or I mean, this is what we call network. Now we can connect anything. A pair of shoes can be connected to the internet. A light pole can be connected to the internet. And this is why we are talking about Internet of Things. And we can see it in, I think what we see is the tip of the iceberg. So we see connected watches, we see, we see connected glasses and so on. This is what we see. This is what the end consumer see. This is maybe a business to consumer application. I think the rest of it and the majority of it lays with the business, with the industries. If you see the logistics sector, the oil and gas sector, the insurance service, and the impact. I mean, the current and future impact of the use of IoT on the way business is being done will be massive. So obviously, we can give examples after in details on what is the difference between the actual, let's say, the hype and the reality. Obviously, as any technology cycles, there is always there is a lot of hype. We talk about the possibilities of what things will be done. For example, there has been some numbers thrown out 3 or 4 years ago that we will have 50 or 60 billions of devices connected by 2020. We are a little bit behind, but it does not mean that we will not get there eventually. So this is an illustration. Eventually we'll get there, but with a little bit of maybe delay. So the reality will take time to materialize because technology needs to evolve, mentalities needs to evolve, regulation needs to evolve, and then whatever predicted will eventually materialize.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and I think for me, there's a lot of hype, but I think there are a lot of things as well that are already quite interconnected to your point, and we're not aware of that, right? Like, we don't really think about it like that, we just take them for granted. So it's just, so maybe moving on to you, Wissam, can you talk to us about what are your thoughts in terms of what are the bigger opportunities for businesses adopting, and let's focus a little bit more on the smaller businesses. I said not so much the ones that are at the forefront of technology, but for a small business, what are the real opportunities of it?
Really, for small businesses, connectivity is the key solution. What we have seen, at least from our expertise as Orange, because this smart city domain is quite vast, and a tremendous amount of systems and applications and vendors showing up every single day with solutions. Because of this connectivity, because of this heterogeneous environment of technologies available right now, and even a cheap technology compared to what we have probably, 3-4 years ago, small businesses have really huge opportunities in the market. Sometimes we see in energy management, we see, for example, as a vertical, this is the main vertical in smart cities, and we see experts, companies that has been in this domain for probably 20, 25 years. Yet you will see a very small company, small business, having a very niche and unique idea that can actually build on top of the data being exchanged from this energy management to create a specific, unique solution. And what we've also, for example, in healthcare, because Orange has also this vertical in healthcare, I'll give you an example. For example, in South Korea, in one of the top hospitals in South Korea, there was what we would say the diagnostic of pathology during an operation for a patient is taking from the moment you take the tissue to do the test, and then get the result and send it to the pathology who's sitting in the next room. It's taking 20 minutes. Yet, for example, with the introduction of 5G network right now, there are small businesses getting these ideas in healthcare that can, for example, make sure that except of 20 minutes, make it 2 to 3 minutes. And this is the use of technology and connectivity. And I can go on with examples. But for example, Orange Telecom is actually managed in December 17.1 million IoT devices on a daily basis in December. And there were so many small businesses as a substitute using those IoT connectivity. I mean, it's just insane what you can do actually. Yeah.
Thank you. And now I'll come back to you on how to tap on those opportunities. Yes, you had a...
Perhaps I can add a little bit to what Wissam says, because it really speaks to my imagination. I think it almost gives a total reset of our economy, because 15 years ago, if you were a startup, you needed to bring a lot of money to invest in systems, IT platforms, and if you had a thought, you probably needed 6, 12 or 18 months to get that together. But as you now say, the small businesses, because everything is connected, all your possible resources are connected, whether it's technology platforms, small data providers, or small service providers. Once you're in that ecosystem, you can almost consume everything by the second. So as a startup today, after this meeting or after this conversation would sit, within an hour we can probably create a company in 12 different cities with an IT infrastructure, with data and analytic capabilities, and have that up and running by the end, perhaps with your network even wider, but have that up and running by the end of the evening. And that capability is really coming our way with interconnection, with connectivity, with 5G networks, and that suddenly makes everybody a player in tomorrow's world. And I think that's the energy that we unleash.
That's really interesting, but it's also an interesting point. Like you're talking about startups, which I think are kind of like by definition a little bit more agile and are being born now into this world, right? But Nizar, maybe can you talk a little bit about, for some of the more established companies, what are the challenges they normally face? I mean, we talk about this transformation. Like, do they need to transform as well?
Yes, the answer is yes. They need to transform. I mean, both companies, large companies, and even public sector organizations with whom we work on a regular basis, they need to transform themselves on multiple dimensions. First is that because of the increasing role, let's say, digital, included connectivity is having, or the impact digital is having on business, these companies, they need to organize themselves. One simple example is that IT, maybe 10 years ago, it used to be called IT, and it used to be a support function under operation. Okay, so when people join the new laptop or so they would go to IT to get a new laptop, or IT would be responsible for the software upgrades and so on. Now, it's no longer called IT, and you'd have a digital department and a chief digital officer who is directly reporting to the CEO, and who is involved in the strategic decision of the company. So basically, and this change is happening, as I was saying, both on the public sector and on the large organization across industry. Starbucks has a chief digital officer. GE has a chief digital officer. New York has a chief digital officer. If we bring it locally, the Smart Dubai office was created specifically to be the digital office of the Emirates of Dubai. So this is an important change within the organization. I mean, both change into the structure of the company, of an organization, also into the mentality. I mean, you have to IT people or engineers talking to strategists or talking to CFOs, to CEO, and so on and so forth. They need to be able to have this conversation together. So this is one. Also, there is an impact on the business models anyway. I mean, on the way services are being delivered. For a basic example is HP, which is now selling a printing service, not necessarily selling the printers themselves. So you can subscribe for I think $6 a month. I don't know if the service is available in the UAE, but in Europe and the US, you can subscribe for $6 a month to get 100 to be able to print 100 pages. And if, for example, I was reading this actually today, if actually you no longer want to keep this subscription, they can deactivate the service remotely. So even if you have the printer with the charges and fully charged, you cannot print. So, so this is an example of how things are. I mean, the impact of business, the way business is being done. Also, so there is the organization, there is the business model, there is the skill set as well that the company or an organization needs to have in terms of people, but also in terms of the way of doing things. So, I mean, there are plenty of examples for that. I mean, we can another example, and we'll finish with that, is that GE, for example, GE maybe 10 years ago, GE, they sell turbines, they sell medical devices. They are not a software company. They don't sell software. So, but they figured out that companies like the likes of IBM or the pure technology players, they were digging into their product, looking at their raw data to offer maintenance contract to their clients. So actually, they had to find a way to access this data of the product they sell. Because anyway, maintenance contract, because they were selling maintenance contract, and if they lose this data to any other competitors, they will lose this business. It's a lucrative business. So this is also an example of how connectivity is impacting the way companies are doing businesses.
I have a quick follow-up on that, particularly considering that Tharawat brings together different businesses. What about, because you've talked about sort of individual companies, individual business models. What about the way businesses are collaborating with each other? And I don't mean obviously the interconnection of it, but just the way they collaborate.
I think there is a mode of collaboration which wasn't there before, and it's increasingly present now. It is collaboration between established large businesses and startups or small businesses. And this collaboration is either between private sector and small businesses, so private or public private. For the public private, a very interesting example, and by the way, it's unique in its kind. It's what is being done here in Dubai with the Dubai Future Foundation. So Dubai Future Foundation is a small incubator where basically it's open to all startups, entrepreneurs from all over the world who can address some of the problems public sector organizations like the RTA, the Dubai Police, the Dubai Health Authority, and so on are facing. So it's a sort of a collaboration forum. So bringing people from everywhere and trying to solve actual problems. So basically you'd have the entrepreneur, the startups as the source of innovation. And they are more agile, they are more flexible. I mean, a large organization cannot do that easily. And they bring their know-how. After, to which extent this is successful, I mean, we have to see. It takes time, because again, it's a matter of mentality, of the way, I mean, it's the way of doing things, actually. So, but it's an interesting idea. So basically, to answer your question, the startups, the small businesses are more and more the source of innovation to established companies and established organizations.
That's really interesting, thank you. Abusing a little bit again your privileged position in the middle of it all. What are the uses you see your customers, or just in general other companies, making of interconnectivity? And do you have any good examples of companies that are really getting it right?
Yeah, let me try to give a couple of examples. And for some industries, it's probably easier than others. I think if you look to Netflix, I think if 2 years ago, they started their worldwide rollout, and I think they almost overnight did a market entry in more than 100 new territories. And the only way that this was possible is to partner with cloud providers, with connectivity providers that could on demand give them access to all those countries and provide them with on-demand systems where they could store their content and distribute that to all the users in that region. I think that's an example in our customer base. Another example, and I try to simplify, and because there is some data privacy probably related to it, but if you look to a mall, which was a very solid business model for many years, but now we see that the mall faces many competitors. We used to go there for shopping, we used to go there to dine, and we used to go there to watch movies. And in all those segments, they now face competition. The online stores that just at your convenience drop you your purchases, the dining with all the deliveries, and instead of having to watch the same movie with the whole family, the children probably watch rather their Netflix, and the parents watch something else. And as a mall, you could then think, okay, it's end of time, I need to do, I'll stop or I'll fade away. And I think in America you see a lot of pictures coming by from empty malls. But if you look here in the UAE, there is some initiatives where the malls say, hey, wait a minute, let me then use the digital capabilities and interconnection to solve that problem. So what they do is they start to consider what type of data can I collect when people sit in the mall. And is there a way where if Jeroen drives into the mall, that I can capture either through my cell phone or my license plate or in another way capture who he is and start gathering data? And can I then, whilst he is in the mall, in a way influence him that I can make his visit to the mall as long as possible, and whilst he is in the mall, make sure that he spends the maximum amount of money in my mall. And it could be that I'm influenced by advertisements on billboards. It could be that in a cinema or in a movie I see a certain advertisement that would guide me to a certain restaurant. Or it could even be that even before I go to the mall, I'm already influenced by the pages on my cell phone that I'm not going to Mall of the Emirates, but I go to another mall because probably there is a better match with me. So we see a lot of, say, traditional non-IT companies in the UAE bringing their systems to our data center, and what they try to do there is, what data do I have of my consumers, and how can I create value for those companies? And that's a great way of utilizing the opportunity of connectivity. And perhaps, and I think this is not a customer of us here, but it was somebody from Uber speaking at a similar situation. And they also start with the Uber Eats, the delivery scooters. And if I look at it initially, it just looks like a scooter that goes from a restaurant to somebody willing to eat pizza or something else. But the additional, or the information that sits behind is that Uber Eats says to the restaurants they connect, I can help you determining what you need to prepare in your kitchen and how many drivers do you need. So if you're a pizzeria, then Uber Eats will connect to data sources on the internet, and they will look for what's on television, what are the events happening in a region, and would those events lead to a certain demand. So if there is a large cricket match, then probably in between 8 and 10, I'm not sure how long a cricket match takes, there is not much demand for pizzas. But if those people get home, they're probably hungry, and then they need pizza. So the service they offer is, can I give the restaurant owners additional information that make them help sell more at the right time, at the right place. And that's examples of how our customers leverage the connectivity they can utilize in our data centers.
Thank you. Changing a little bit on the other side of that, I'm not Uber, not a startup, I'm not even close to being tech savvy. Wissam, what would be kind of like your top line recommendations as to, I'm a little bit late to the game, but I'm starting to think about embracing this wonderful interconnectivity IoTC world. What would be your top recommendations for a company that's just starting to think about it? How do they approach it?
I'll start the road, but I just remembered a very funny story to add to Jeroen. Mobile operators in general, they have this pride that we have the mobile network and we have our subscribers. And I was 8 years in a mobile operator, so I know very well that. And when, for example, Google approaches a mobile operator here in the UAE a few years ago, and they wanted to, what they say, they want to install our servers at the edge, which means whatever traffic goes outside the country, it will actually hit that router for Google, whatever. And of course, the mobile operators will refuse, because we know you're putting your server on my network and you're sniffing my traffic, so you will know my consumers, whether it's the consumer or enterprise, where they're going and where they're visiting and how you can target them for free. So you're taking my subscribers. Recently, a few months ago, a very close friend of mine who's head of infrastructure and of the backbone, one of the operators, he told me that the same company, which is Google, approached them and said, would you like us to advise you where you have problems in your network? Where do you have drop calls? Because simply, that simple device is sending information to the owner, which is Google, and telling them, oh, I have a drop call in this spot. So really data, as Jeroen was saying, it's just massive data, structured data, unstructured data, semi-structured data that you can't control whether you're a mobile operator. Back to your question, really to drive this, because for example, I'll give you an example of a client that we're talking to, he has a very massive master plan here in Dubai that we're hopefully getting the project, and he says, I don't know smart cities, I don't know IoT, it's just this topic freaks me out. I have never implemented this. So what do you recommend for me as a starting point for what kind of use case I have? Really, we really look at the use case, not the technology. Because the technology at the end is just available. Do I use LoRa network? Do I use this sensor? Do I use whatever? It's just what you build is the use case. And what use case is the customer is looking at? Is he looking, for example, in this region, what we have seen, we've seen use cases focused on traffic management system. And what kind of data coming from the traffic management system and other systems that they can interoperate with and create some kind of a journey for digital signage, video management system, analytics, video analytics, traffic management system to create a scene or a scenario. And use cases related also in this region as well to energy management. we have seen lots of cases with customers saying my bill is actually one of the biggest malls here in UAE has a bill of more than 6 digits a day. A day, and I've seen the figure myself. And really, he wants to drive a use case where he can optimize on energy. So then you can look at technology at the later stage. But these use cases, energy management, traffic management system, enterprises and government really are now looking at how can I utilize cloud. You know, most of, as before the talk, Jeroen was saying that, you know, most of the big giants are coming to the region. Microsoft Azure opened the data centers over here. And enterprises are actually looking right now, what kind of use cases I can have, where can I have, you know, optimize on my CapEx, on my OpEx, on my people, by utilizing, by getting data, going to the cloud, what use cases from my IT organization, how do I do digital transformation within my organization that can help me, you know, optimize on my cost. Many use cases that really are available in the market.
So start with the use case.
Yeah, of course, use cases.
One, I guess, a little bit more open to the three of you. We've talked a lot about it from the private sector point of view. You kind of alluded public at some point, but I guess a very important question for me is, are our regulators, our policymakers, our legislative frameworks prepared for it? And a particular interesting point for me within that is the whole interconnectivity issue, right? Because are they looking at it individually, locally? Is there some sort of conversation going on globally? Like, where does that stand in terms of how industry is doing?
So yeah, sitting in the middle with all the connections. I think the specific characteristics of this region is that we have a heavily regulated telecom sector, and that's not only the UAE, but all the countries around us. And as we've addressed, all of us this evening, interconnection and the opportunity sits in that you can freely connect to anybody inside your ecosystem, access any data, anywhere, and that's where the opportunity is created. So there is tension in the way, say, the telecom sector was or is still regulated here in the region, and the way we on a global scale now have the opportunity of doing business. Specifically on the UAE, I think the carriers have always contributed significantly by the royalties they pay to the growth of the UAE, to the cities and to where we are today. Globally, carriers in say the new interconnected world are under pressure with their own products. Pricing has gone down significantly, margins have gone down significantly, but here in the region, those are protected for the reason of contributing to the government and to the growth of the country. If you see the conversations that the regulator have and see the steps that the carriers are taking, then they follow the demand in the market. And it's still not as easy to do business in a real digital or interconnected way as in many global markets, but we see a trend into the right direction. And especially if you look to what the telecom regulator is publishing, the language they use, I think that's more and more in line with say, our day-to-day business language. And it will take probably still a couple of years before we're seamless into the global market. But I think if you read where the country wants to sit on the competitive index, on the interconnection index or cloud readiness index, there's definitely the drive that they want to be more interconnected and more open. But there is this tension on we can't throw away what we have today without having new revenue streams and new products. I think we're balancing nicely in between those two worlds.
But you seem confident.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I think, and partly by the government leads in many ways with IoTs and smart cities. As Wissam mentioned, we see a lot of the big global clouds moving into the region, and that's all steps that cannot be reverted. The fact that Microsoft opened their Azure region makes everybody speak about it. All the enterprises, the local enterprises, they want to test what it is. They want to go into that cloud. They need the connectivity, and that demand is day by day widening the regulation bit by bit. So I'm very positive on that.
I've seen you both very nodding, so I
just want to add to Jeroen the statement he said. They're actually following the demand. Yes, there are really good steps being taken, especially in the UAE. There have been many laws implemented, at least the Dubai Data Law and other laws to govern the data, to be able to say who owns this data, who has the right to see this data, who doesn't have the right. There are tremendous amount of effort happening in the region. KSA has this 2030 vision as well. They want to be able to create some kind of an open data portal where all government entities can actually open their data sets available to public. Yet there will always be this data governance umbrella operators, as Jeroen said, really they are doing government doing leaps in regulation, but telecom operators at the end they will follow.
I find it interesting that, you seem to be referring to the broader region, right? Because I feel sometimes living in Dubai, it feels like you're in this bubble of the city of tomorrow. We just last week had the announcement of like this, what is Dubai Future District, backed by funding, by regulations, but it's interesting, you think that's kind of like maybe not at the same pace, but you are kind of seeing the rest of the region also keeping up with that.
Yes. Bahrain has an initiative for open data portal, along with data governance, categorization of data, how data is ingested, and who has the right. Is there any sensitive data that need to be sanitized? Qatar has also leaped recently in creating more than probably 5 verticals, from the transformation to transport, smart city platform as well. Dubai started before them. They have the Dubai Data Law. This is actually implemented and mandated by His Highness, that now there's a law that mandates every single government entity to share data. You have not seen, probably Dubai, the UAE is the only city that has the law mandates government entities to open and share data. And I think, in the coming few years, this will be more open.
You agree broadly?
I agree. I think, for me, if we talk about regulation, it's not an easy subject to tackle, and everyone is trying. Every country, every region is trying to address it from each own context. So, and there are multiple dimensions. There is the regulation of the technology, there is the protection of the consumer, and at the heart of this, there is the data. At the end of the day, what we are doing is that we are transmitting data and we are sharing data. This is what it's all about, right? And what we are talking about is how to store, transmit, and process data. So, as Wissam was saying, there is this initiative, done by Dubai, which is establishing the data law and trying to classify data and who should access what, and so on and so forth. There are multiple initiatives around the world. Even in Europe now, there is the General Data Protection Law. They're trying to circumvent, to try to see how they can control actually the flow of data. Another aspect, I would say, it's not necessarily related to regulation, but I think it's, I would call it broadly, is related to the way you manage digital. I don't know if you heard about this GAFA tax conversation in Europe. So, because some of the companies, some of the American companies like the Amazons, the Google, and so on, most of them are based in, let's say, tax-friendly countries like Luxembourg, like Ireland, and so on and so forth. They still operate in France and Italy and the UK and so on, and they're generating a certain amount of revenue. So the government want to have a share of this, but they are still struggling on how to tax this. And everyone is trying to go by. Every country, every region is trying to go by its own ways in a way. Here another way of doing it is trying to minimize the impact of what we call the over-the-top player, the OTT player, like the Skypes and WhatsApp and so on. It's another way as well of trying to protect the local companies from the impact of these global players who are multinationals, who are really taking the lion's share of the revenues of the. So this is also another aspect of regulation. So I would say there is the data, there is this aspect, and how to tax or share a little bit of revenue with the global technology player. The other aspect is that because everything is connected to everything, where do security stand in this? So how do we prevent ourselves and protect the customers or the users? Because now we are talking about IoT things. These things, at least now, the way they are manufactured, they are not manufactured with security in mind. They're just manufactured to be cheap chipset, to be able to transmit or to receive information and to be able to connect. So how to reinforce the fact that the manufacturer needs to be security aware? I mean, there is a law which has been issued in I think it's the first of its kind in California, the security of the Internet of Things. Okay, there is a law, but it's not clear how this law would be reinforced. How do you want to reinforce this on the manufacturer in reality? So, with those areas, there are challenges in establishing regulation, consistent regulation. I think as every region, every country is trying to do, every regulator is trying to do his best.
Thank you. I mean, it's a really interesting point, particularly in terms of government's role of balancing, allowing for that innovation, but at the same time, we haven't gone too much into detail into the risks of it, right? And how do you protect your consumers, and how do you, and keeping that balance is not an easy, I think, thing to achieve. But it all broadly seems like you're confident that they're getting there.
One thing I want to add. In countries, as Jeroen was saying, in countries, the governments are doing initiatives to be able to govern that. However, there is always where your data cross-border the country, where the government doesn't have authority over it. I'll give you an example. End of May, I travel every year to Montreal to see my family over there. And it was my first time I took my kids with me. And I booked on Expedia. So I just booked on Expedia and I used my personal email. And I still remember when I finished booking Expedia and I got the confirmation that that your ticket, you're traveling, I went to the kitchen, so from the living room to the kitchen to put my mobile in charge. And then I got a pop-up from Google saying, would you like to download Montreal map? Now, I won't be able to stop Google, and the UAE government won't be able to stop Google because they're sniffing the traffic. But at least from data point of view, whether IoT data, connectivity data, happening within the borders, the government has the initiative, has the law to mandate certain things. Yes, there should be, as Nizar, security for anything connected. There should be, but there is at least a law now for data. And let's see what happens in the next future.
But that's a challenge, right? Like keeping the data within borders is, I would think, essentially impossible.
No, for example, government data, Dubai Healthcare Authority data, Department of Road and Transportation data, Telecom Regulatory Authority data. This is data within the organization, or within the country. So the government has the power to at least govern the data and create a data law. But once your data cross border, that's why you have now the law in Europe, which is exactly, which is trying even to force those giants, to respect. But let's see.
This is why Equinix is
Well, thank you, gentlemen, very much for that. I will slowly open it up for questions, but I just have a last one. Given that that we're starting a new decade, I would like to know from you, which do you think are the 2-3 trends, technological innovations, like big things from the topic that we're discussing that we'll see in the next 10 years? Maybe you first? Or Wissam, feel a bit more ready?
I really think healthcare is one of the primary. I think that in the next decade we will see a tremendous leap in using technologies, for example, such as 5G, as the example I gave you for the pathologies, artificial intelligence and the drones and robotics. Really now, drones are, yes, they're fun and to play with, but there are use cases of using drones and using some kind of an artificial intelligence code running on the drone to be able to, use cases such as facial recognition, where can reach places where you weren't able to reach before. I think these 3 to 4 are the next we're gonna see in the next decade.
If we assume that the Internet of Things, including drones and autonomous vehicles, are something which is happening now, it's always difficult to make prediction. But what I would say is,
we will not hold you accountable. It's still that way.
I would say there are 3 things. First, artificial intelligence. Something second that we call computing at the edge, or edge computing. And the third aspect, which is a buzzword we hear everywhere, but I think it will become reality, is blockchain. And the impact on the way some businesses are doing. Artificial intelligence, because it's, at the end of the day, it's a way to process data. It's a way to help you see in the data something that you cannot see by your own, and eventually automate certain aspects and automate certain decisions in a very high level. This is what, at the end of the day, artificial intelligence is about, in my opinion. Second is, this edge computing means that we will have devices, more and more powerful, more and more capable, and for security and for cost reason, you would rather localize processing the information rather than having the platform structure that we have now. It's more and more, what we are having now is the platform economy. Netflix is a platform, Google is a platform, Facebook is a platform. I don't know what the impact of edge computing will be on Equinix, but I think it's a trend to watch. And the third is blockchain, is because I think it's beyond the technology itself. At the end of the day, blockchain is a database. This is what, it's a distributed database where all the changes in this database can be seen to everyone. This is roughly what it is. And the impact of that is that it removes the man in the middle, or the trusted part that we need in some kind of, let's say, financial transaction. You need someone who would issue a credit card to make sure it's legit, or issue your money. If you don't need this person or this entity anymore, it's a massive change in the way things will be done. Beyond the technology itself. At the end of the day, here we are not really interested, even if it's about connectivity. We are more interested in the way we use technology, like Wissam was saying about the use cases and the proof of concept, rather than the technology itself. You don't care how the email works, you just send emails. And this is I think these are in my opinion, these are the main, maybe, interesting trends.
Thank you, particularly for that analogy for blockchain. I think now I grasp a bit better.
I think we're very much aligned. I would say 5G and artificial intelligence, that they will dramatically change your life. I've got 2 daughters, one at high school, one at university. I think the jobs they will run into today don't exist, because I think artificial intelligence will change many, many ways of doing business, many, many roles in businesses. in consultancy and law firms and in all kind of businesses where we have many students today. They will do different jobs because artificial will take part of that. And if I go to healthcare and 5G, and the way people try to explain that to me is, if today I have a physical complaint and I go to a doctor, then I depend on how much he, from all the books that he has, can get into his mind, and with his interpretation consult me. And then imagine if 5G connects us globally with almost unlimited speed and bandwidth, and then I have some artificial intelligence with it, then probably I have sensors on me, or whether it's in my phone or in my clothes, that can predict, probably based on the way my body responds, a lot more. But if they find something, then they can almost in a split second access any resource worldwide, any patient that has been treated within seconds, and that will also dramatically change our life, change healthcare and our quality of life. And so 5G, the way it impacts healthcare and artificial intelligence, definitely agree.
Thank you. I mean, healthcare seems to be one of the sectors that has more to give. It is already, right? Gentlemen, thank you very much for that. This is as far as I take you. Now we'll open it up to the floor for some potentially further grilling. Any questions, anyone?
Thank you so much for the participation and all the interesting insights. My name is Jeroen. I just wanted to ask maybe two unrelated questions. My first question would be education. How do we have to educate, future citizens, whether they become educated consumers, so conscious consumers when it comes to connectivity, but also conscious employees? How do we have to form the future, work fields? I feel like currently we're living a bit in a gap. You just mentioned, your two daughters that probably grow up in a very different school world than the average, in the audience here. I think we all still read books. We all still remember when we connected the first time to the internet. But maybe Scandinavian countries are, a role model for how they teach children naturally to deal with all those new technologies. But how can we maybe transition this gap for people that currently are in the work field or are in their teenage years or upcoming, not only universities, but really the basic schools that every citizen should have access to. So education would be a bit my broad question.
So I can give you my personal view, and if I think about opportunity or about education, and I just see opportunity. I think there is many initiatives today where we utilize internet and interconnectivity, and we allow people in Africa to participate in education, to participate in sharing technology, to participate in making making a living and growing themselves. There's examples of companies in Silicon Valley that use women in Africa to look at support functions, customer support functions, responding to specific queries. And because of interconnectivity and today's technology, they're able to do that from where they live in Africa with some facilities that are provided, and with that educate themselves and become more participating in this world. I think when you look to the youth, my children probably out-qualify me in that, the way they consume technology, the way they think. I think where we still have a huge challenge is if artificial intelligence is taking over, say, part of our society in the way we interact, or the way companies do their role, then how do we teach, and that's where I perhaps answer the question, but how do we then teach the people that develop that artificial intelligence that there is no bias in those systems? And how can we then make sure that there is, on top of that artificial intelligence, always a layer of humans that determine the way that interaction is taking place? And I don't have an answer for that, but I'll probably look to my children to see how that develops. I'm not sure if that helps.
Any other questions?
a smart city? Will we ever get to that smartness?
That's actually a good question, because I mean, we cannot make the analogy between a smartphone and a smart city. I mean, it's just smart city in itself is the ability to use, I mean, broadly speaking, to use the technologies that are the digital technology in order to improve the way the citizens and the residents of the city live, the way services are provided, the way the city is run and operated, and to improve the competitiveness and the attractiveness of the city. As you see, it's a very broad definition. After this is, I mean, because of this definition, this is why a smart city is a process, not a destination. So, I mean, okay, maybe we can say Dubai is a smart city by certain dimension, by certain criteria, by comparison to other cities. So it isn't, we cannot look at this in absolute terms. I don't know if it answered the question a little bit.
No, it's, I understand and I agree, because we're living in a constant evolution in technology, and there is no way we're going to get to that. I mean, I think it's utopia in a way. Jeroen, we are seeing today, for security reasons, that data centers are going inside the companies. Many entities that I'm aware of are trying to bring in their data center within their environment, within their company. Are you seeing that? Is that a trend that is happening?
So I think globally we see the opposite. I think if you read the reports from Gartner, from IDC, you will see that the trend for enterprise data centers is that they will go out of their buildings. Because inside their buildings they cannot generate the interconnection or the ecosystem value that they need to connect. But bringing the data center out into, say, a public data center like Equinix doesn't mean that you no longer control your data. Nizar already mentioned the word edge compute. What we see enterprises do is they bring their internal data center to the edge. But that still can mean that all the systems they bring there are their own systems, and it's only their own people that physically manage those systems. And then where they need to buy, or they want to buy third-party services, whether it's a Microsoft Azure, whether it's a network service to another office location, or whether it's analytic capabilities of a system integrator, that's where they then bring the connectivity, the interconnection. But they also there have the ability to buy the security services. If you isolate yourself inside your building, then the ability to do business is exactly your neighbors. Because everybody else sits out at that edge and is digitally interconnected. And there is a very large governmental company here in the UAE, and they hired a new CIO. And they gave him a task of, we have a double-digit growth, but you cannot expand your IT budget. It's frozen at this point. And data security is our first concern. And he took a couple of months to look at the overall IT environment. And then he decided to bring 23 applications that he was running in-house into a data center and into some public cloud services. And when he presented that to his board, he got a lot of resistance. And he answered that with a very simple statement. He said, I can try to hire, with a flat budget, 6-7 people that try to look after our security and keep everything in-house. Or I can trust that a company like Microsoft, for example, that runs security services 24/7 globally with thousands of employees, probably have a better capability of managing my data than myself. So what we see with our customers, if in today's digital world, if you want to participate, you cannot rely on keeping everything in-house. You need to bring that data to an outside location, to the edge of where everybody connects. Then you need to make very sensible decisions on do these systems, are those my own systems? I buy them physically myself, it's my own people maintaining them, or do I partly use a third-party vendor? The two of the airlines here in the UAE, one has taken the decision to manage everything themselves. So it's their own internal IT people, it's their own hardware that they brought and configured. It's still in a public data center, and that's where they connect to the internet, because if we want to fly, we go to a website, we need to have that interaction. Another airline, they utilize a huge global system integrator, and that has a lot of expertise on that field, and they, as a service, deliver that capability to that airline. So we see the trends of people moving their data into data centers like Equinix to the edge.
Thank you. I think we have two. Yeah. Okay. I think I saw you first.
Hi. Thank you. Just going back to the trends identified before you finished speaking out for this decade, and you've always spoken about artificial intelligence. What would be a use case of applying artificial intelligence to an industry like construction industry, going as broad as from design consultancy, construction, property development? Can you think of any?
I can think of one use case that at least I've been exposed to, not in construction but on energy management. The traditional way right now of using smart services and smart unique solutions for energy management is to be able to assess your baseline, see how much you consume per day, and try by using some kind of data, running data, doing some data analytics to come up with an algorithm where you can do some kind of optimization and efficiency on your energy. However, the customer was a little bit advanced, and he said, I would like to see an AI algorithm where the machine itself takes the decision. I don't want my facility management to be able to see, I have less footprint over here, then okay, let me increase the temperature and go to another zone where I have more footprint, where I can, for example, get the temperature down. I would like the machine to know that there is less footprint. The machine will take action to increase the temperature and sends that power to another zone. This is one of the AI use cases that we've seen recently here in Dubai.
There was another question in the back.
Thank you. What I'm wondering is how much of the impact of connectivity, increased connectivity, IoT, do you think is going to be incremental to things that we already have versus granting us the ability to do new things that current technology does not permit?
So you mean the proportion between the incremental benefit versus new benefit? I think you'd rather do quantum physics than answer this question.
I think IDC did a prediction, and I think by 2022 they expect that interconnection, so the data companies privately exchange, is 13 times bigger than the total volume of the internet. Just to give you some kind of scale. So that's indeed outside our imagination.
Maybe another indicator, or maybe it's not directly related to the question, but it maybe gives perspective that within maybe, I think it's IDC or ID, within the next decade, by 2030, the amount of laptops, smartphones connected to the internet will represent only 16% of whatever is connected to the internet. So, might give you an indication how to quantify that. I mean, in terms of economic value, I don't know. This is what we're doing case by case.
Yeah, one thing, because I have a presentation in the next 2 weeks, and I was doing some homework. 90% 90% of the increase of data that we're witnessing happened only in the last 2 years. In 2010, we had, or at least the market analysis saying that there was 1.5 zillion terabyte. Now we're talking about 12.5. But only in the past 2 years, 90% of that data has been increased. So imagine the increase of 5G network coming for the next, let's say, 2021 to 2024, where at least, just to give you an example, 550 million mobile handsets have been sold in China right now with 5G chipset on. So just imagine that the amount of data that 550 million as we speak will generate. So I don't think we have a rough figure, but I guess it's quite well.
Another question here.
Do you think that within the smart city, the connectivity and so on will happen, or it will be the same case that happened with sustainability, where 10 years ago sustainability was a hype, and the only key factor that accelerated the whole process, it was the law, right? So the law and the awareness of the industry saying, from now on, you have to have this label, from now on, you have to produce in a certain way. So do you think that the same environment or the same case can happen with the connectivity, looking at the privacy? Because you said something quite relevant before, whereas the connectivity of our bodies, no? Or our behavior in a database where you can trace a pattern and you can detect in advance a certain illness or a certain problematic, right? And fix that before it happens.
I think the answer is yes, if the question was the impact of regulation on accelerating the cycle of adoption of these technologies eventually. So Wissam was talking about multiple examples about energy efficiency. Many of the developers here and operators in the region are looking at reducing their energy bill. Why? Because there is a gradual lift of subsidies on the price of energy in the UAE, in Saudi, in Kuwait, and so on and so forth. So, because you pay more, you need to be more efficient. And one of the main advantages of adopting Internet of Things, IoT technology in multiple use cases is about efficiency, is about operational efficiency. So, in some cases, yes, the regulation will have an impact on expediting this, on expediting the process. But I mean, at least the regulation shouldn't stop this trend, at least. But it is not the only enabler or trigger. I mean, there are other aspects as well.
Let me add also, one of the meetings a few months ago, an entity, a very well-known entity in Abu Dhabi, wanted to approach the government to be able to create some kind, let's say, mandate a law on energy usage. So let's say, for example, you have a warehouse that they're using, 40 kilowatts per hour, but you're actually over-consuming what you are globally, let's say, as a baseline. So they wanted to educate the government to create a law where they can, for example, in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, there will be a mandate saying you are not allowed to consume more than this figure. And on the other side, the government will also, or the entity responsible to provide energy, will give you an incentive. So for example, if I give a certain power plant X number of megawatts, and they don't consume that megawatt and they send it back to the grid, I'll give them credit for that. So there are talks, but I guess it's at a very early stage.
So we've run out of time, so we'll wrap it up here. But Jeroen, Wissam, Nizar, thank you very much for sharing your insights and your expertise